Hey, what's going on, guys? Today we're gonna kind of work backwards a little bit. So for you guys, for you at home today, you are going to start looking at this idea of macromolecules. Today we're gonna kind of talk through the big picture of things, and then tomorrow, when you get to class, um, we're actually going to take a big step back and we're going to build up to what macromolecules are and actually what makes those up. So today you'll kind of get a big picture. Tomorrow we'll get all the detail as far as the pieces that make up where you guys are at today. Okay, so last week I gave you an assignment that really just started having you to start picking apart this idea of a macromolecule and what that is, and what that looks like, and how that ties to things that you've seen, such as food labels and stuff, and the stuff that you see on those food labels. Obviously, a lot of you struggled with that because you really didn't know a whole lot, which is perfectly fine, and that was really the point. I just wanted you to kind of construct in your brain what you knew and kind of convey that to me. So today we're gonna talk about these guys macromolecules, what they are. Okay, so as you should have seen, actually let me back up real quick. So today's focus, our essential question here, is going to be, what are the molecules that build living organisms? Okay, so we originally started out talking about what is living, what is non-living. We had those 8 characteristics of life that we discussed, and now that we kind of have an idea of what makes something living, even though those 8 characteristics aren't always perfect, we have a good idea that if you match most of those, you're going to be a living thing. So now that we know that, we want to look into the idea of what makes living things up. What is the tiny parts that build this organism or this thing, such as a human being? And so if you look on this screen, obviously, there are 4 types of macromolecules. There is carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. Okay, so to start off, I want to kind of break down this term macromolecule again. Okay, comes in two parts: macromolecules. Macro just means big. Okay, and then molecules is simply just a large group of atoms bonded together, or molecules are a group of atoms bonded together. Therefore, so putting that together, macromolecule is a large group of atoms bonded together. Now, before we can get into the big molecules, we have to first kind of just introduce these guys right here, because these guys are really, really, really important to what we're going to talk about today. You'll see them throughout these notes, and tomorrow is where we'll really kind of talk more in detail about these, so don't freak out if you don't fully understand this bit. So elements, or atoms as we call them, are the tiniest particles that make things up in the universe. And so there are 6 of these specifically that make up living things. Okay, and so when we look at all living things, all are made up of these 6 atoms or elements that you see right here: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and oxygen. Okay, so those are the big guys. Okay, we abbreviate this, or we kind of give this acronym of CHOMPS. Okay, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur, just to kind of help us remember what the 6 elements of life are. We will talk more about this tomorrow, but carbon is the most special. Okay, we rely on carbon. And sorry guys, I'm shooting this from outside and there's cars driving on by. Okay, so carbon is the most special of any of them. Okay, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow. So the other term that we need to make sure we understand before we jump into these guys are monomers and polymers. Okay, so break this down really simply. Mono means one, poly means many. So monomers are a single molecule of something. Okay, think of it like a single Lego block. Polymers are many monomers, or like we said, poly is many monomers bonded together to create a large molecule. Okay, so if these are each monomers, when you put them together, that makes a polymer. Okay, and when we talk about these guys of macromolecules, we're going to be using these terms monomers and polymers because there are things that make up each type of macromolecule. Okay, and hopefully you'll kind of see that a little more clearer here in just a second. So let's jump in. Let's start with carbohydrates. So carbohydrates, these guys are probably the macromolecule you are most familiar with. Okay, carbohydrates, you see them, you hear about them all the time on food labels and when you hear about diets and all kinds of stuff. So what are they? In essence, carbohydrates simply are the energy that your body uses. Okay, so we have these guys, simple carbs, simple carbohydrates like glucose and fructose, which are sugars, and they provide the cells with the ability to make ATP, which is cellular energy. Okay, so in a nutshell, carbohydrates, they make energy. Okay, or they are energy. Okay, it's what our bodies use, what living things use to make energy. Okay, so glucose, fructose, anything that really ends in ose like sucrose, those are all sugars. Sugars are carbohydrates. Okay, then you have these things called complex carbs. So simple carbs, those are like your really quick energy type sugars. Think like you eat Sour Patch Kids. That's full of simple carbs. Okay. You have complex carbs like cellulose and starch, which are going to be found more in your breads and pastas that help in providing structure in things like plants. Okay, but also those complex carbs provide longer term energy. Okay, so energy that'll last a while. Okay, so for you athletes, you'll hear all the time carb loading, right? Before an event, that's all about eating those complex carbs so that you can break them down over a long period of time and get energy from them. Okay, so in a nutshell, carbohydrates, all about energy. Okay, it's all about energy, and then particularly in plants, it can provide structure. Something like cellulose and starch are used to provide plants with the firm structure that they hold. So what are they made of? What do they make? Okay, carbohydrates are made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Again, three of those elements that are from the chomps that you saw earlier in the slides. The monomer of carbohydrates are called monosaccharides. Okay, again, mono means one, poly means many. So monomer of a carb is a monosaccharide. The polymer of a carb is a polysaccharide. Okay, not hugely important for what we're going to talk about and really look at. It really just kind of frames the idea that you have these simple carbs like monosaccharides, and then you have these complex carbs like polysaccharides. Okay, and so all that is when you look at so these sugars that we looked at back here, so glucose, when I have one glucose, that's a monosaccharide. When I put one glucose together with a fructose, which makes sucrose, that's going to then be a more complex carb, which is going to be a polysaccharide because we have more than one carbohydrate put together. Okay, so one more time, again, big idea of carbohydrates. It's all about energy. Energy, energy, energy. Okay? Carbohydrates is what our body uses to make energy. Okay, so that brings us to our second macromolecule, and that is proteins. Okay, proteins, what do they do? Okay, they're all about structure, protection, and these guys called enzymes. Okay, so as far as structure, many of the structural components in organisms are composed of proteins. Okay, think about when you think protein, the biggest thing that you probably, or the thing that probably comes to mind first is muscle, right? So proteins are needed to build muscle. Okay, muscle is one of the big structural components in living organisms. Okay, proteins play a big role in cell membranes also, as far as making up the cell membrane and providing structure to the cells. So structure is a big thing for proteins. That's kind of the main function. Okay, they also are in charge of protection. All of your immune cells in the body are composed of proteins. So the cells that fight off infection, that fight sicknesses, those are all composed of proteins. Okay, and then we have these special proteins called enzymes that exist to speed up reactions. Okay, and so I put that on there just so we kind of can see that term, because you'll see it and hear it all throughout biology. Enzymes basically make stuff happen. If your body needs something to happen quicker, it's probably going to make an enzyme, or it's probably going to have an enzyme to make that happen. So big picture though, when we think about proteins, it's all about structure. Okay, primarily it's all about structure. Okay, so let's look at the monomers, polymers. Okay, these are going to be terms that you'll see and hear eventually. Proteins are made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, again, all a part of CHOMPs. Okay, the monomers are amino acids. Okay, and you won't hear that word again probably for a while, few months down the road, but just so you're familiar with it, an amino acid is the monomer of proteins. The polymer of a protein is a protein. Okay, so if you take a bunch of amino acids and chain them together, that makes a protein. That's the polymer. Okay, each individual amino acid is the monomer. Okay, so that's going to move us on to nucleic acids. Nucleic acids were one that everybody kind of struggled with on that assignment that I gave you last week, because you won't see these guys on anywhere on a food label or anything like that. Nucleic acids are all about genetic material. Okay, this is DNA. Okay, DNA and RNA, which we'll talk more about later down the road. Okay, in essence, what they do, what nucleic acids do, is they instruct the building of proteins. Okay, so your DNA that is in each of your cells is a recipe to make proteins, is basically what it is. And then the proteins that are made make everything that you are. Okay, and so when we talk about DNA or nucleic acids, let me back up. So DNA is deoxyribose nucleic acid. So DNA is a type of nucleic acid. All that does is it holds genetic information which instructs proteins to be built. Okay, so whenever your body needs something to happen, your DNA is going to give the code to build the protein that's going to go make that happen. Okay, so what are they made of? What do they make? Nucleic acids are made of carbon, hydrogen, phosphorus, nitrogen, oxygen. Okay, the monomers of those guys are what we call nucleotides, and we'll talk about those again later down the road. But the monomer of a nucleic acid is what we call a nucleotide. When you take a nucleotide and you put a bunch of them together in a chain, that's the polymer, which is nucleic acids. Okay, so notice nucleic acids and proteins, the polymers are just the macromolecule itself. Okay, and examples of these would be DNA and RNA in the case of nucleic acids. Okay, so that's going to bring us to our last macromolecule of lipids. Okay, lipids was the other one that y'all had a hard time with because you probably never heard that term. The term you're most familiar with hearing is fats. Okay, lipids are fats. Okay, so when you look at a food label, you're not going to see lipids, you're going to see the term fat. And speaking of food labels, you won't see nucleic acids on food labels because nucleic acids are a part of all living things, right? So nucleic acids aren't something that necessarily has a numerical amount that we have to get from food, so it really doesn't matter to put it on a food label. Instead, just know that we eat living things, right? Whether it be plants or animals, and as we eat those things, we get parts of nucleic acids, specifically those nucleotides, the monomers of nucleic acids. We get those, and then our body recycles those to make more DNA and RNA. Okay, so you won't ever see this on on the nutrition facts of food, but they're always there. You're always using these. You're always making new nucleic acids, and you're using the nucleic acids from the foods you eat to make those new things. Okay, so brings us back to lipids. Okay, lipids are fats. Okay, so we're going to skip over polar, nonpolar for a little bit. We'll probably come back to that a little bit later. But the big idea of lipids is structure. Okay, structure and insulation. Okay, so most lipids are vital to certain parts of the cell, like the cell membrane. Okay, the cell membrane is completely made up of lipids. Okay. And as far as this polar non-polar thing, we'll talk about it a little bit later. And it kind of describes how the cell membrane works. But for now, we just need to know that lipids provide structure. Okay. And so, specifically in the cell membrane of every cell in your body, it's made up of lipids. Okay. And that is what allows your cells to function as they do. Okay. The other thing that lipids are good for is insulation and storage. Some lipids exist as insulation in the body. Think about it. The bigger you are, probably the warmer you get, right? The more fat you have, the more insulation there is to hold heat in. You'll see that all the time in polar bears as well, right? So polar bears are big, fat animals because they need to stay warm. Okay. The other thing, as far as storage, lipids are emergency storage of energy. Okay, so when your body doesn't have carbohydrates to burn, it's then going to burn the fats instead. Okay, and then that's how your body's going to get energy if there's no carbohydrates. Okay, and you've probably heard that when it comes to the keto diet, right? Keto diet is all about not eating carbs and eating a bunch of fat. And the reason that is because then your body starts to burn the fat off of your body, which causes you to lose weight. Okay, so lipids, all about structure, specifically in the cell membrane, and all about storage of energy and insulating your body to hold heat in. Okay, so again, what do they make and what are they made of? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, more of CHOMPs. Okay, the monomer of lipids, there's really not a monomer. I know here it says glycerols and fatty acids. Notice the asterisks. There's really not a monomer of lipids. Lipids just kind of exist as lipids for the most part. Okay, so just kind of ignore that. The big idea to know with lipids is that a lipid is a fat, okay, and it's a chain of a bunch of these glycerols and fatty acids that, when put all together, that makes a fat. Okay, so lipids, simply polymer is a lipid. Okay. So that is the end of our macromolecules. So that is the big idea. Those are the 4 things that make up living things. Okay, I'm going to stop there. This was a little bit longer than I wanted it to be. Okay, but it's a bunch of information that you're going to use over the next couple weeks. So get these notes down. If you need to go back and relook through this, please do. This is, again, the basis of kind of where we're going in the next couple weeks. So have a wonderful day. Please email me if you have any questions.